When Sammy fell ill, it felt like stepping into an alternate, shadowy reality. We had been financially secure with our 2 full-time jobs and no kids. But suddenly, surviving on a single income was a harsh adjustment. Not to mention the way the insurance companies dodged paying for over half of Sammy's treatment. It was infuriating. Sammy gave it her all. She faced everything with grace. Despite the ups and downs of every doctor's visit, progress felt impossible. Every time we thought we'd moved forward, we ended up backtracking. There's always next time, they'd say, but we were starting to realize we might be running out of following times. A year later, Sammy's condition had taken a sharp decline. By then, what had once seemed catastrophic had become heartbreakingly routine. I did everything I could to lift her spirits, but by that point, the light in her had dimmed. We hardly spoke anymore. One day, a colleague of mine, Aaron, invited me to his bachelor party, which he had planned extravagantly. I wasn't planning to go, but Sammy encouraged me. "You should get out of the house," she smiled faintly. "Do something normal for a change." I resisted at first, but her rare smile broke down my defenses. She was genuinely happy to see I still had connections outside our struggles. How could I refuse? I agreed to be the designated driver, reassuring her I wouldn't be gone for more than a day and was just a phone call away. Sammy didn't seem to need that reassurance as much as I needed to give it. This was in November. Aaron was planning a December wedding and wanted one big night with all his friends. Though I was just a work friend, when you're in your mid-30s, you take whatever social connections come your way. Aaron invited at least 25 people. In mid-November, I packed my bag and joined a party bus heading to Annapolis. After drinks and dinner at the hotel, I spent a few hours losing money at the casino. I gambled away $200 at the roulette table, but unexpectedly won back $600 playing blackjack. After months of losing every battle, that small victory felt terrific. I can't deny I was enjoying myself, but nowhere near as much as Aaron's best man, Jason, who was wearing goggles that spelled out boobs. It was hard to outshine that. Realizing there'd be no need for a designated driver, I let loose a bit. After 5 shots of mint schnapps, guilt crept in. I called Sammy, and she just laughed it off. "It's nice hearing you slur," she said. "You're a fun drunk." The rest of the night was a blur. More drinks, dancing, cheering for Aaron, flashing lights, and wandering between dance floors and bars in search of a taco truck. I remember sitting on a park bench, half listening to one of Aaron's friends drone on about the health benefits of roasted seeds. Something about antioxidants. Mostly it was just noise. Later, we ended up at the hotel. Jason had rented Aaron a massive suite, and 12 of us crammed in for the after-party. Of course, exotic dancers were part of the mix. I went overboard on the drinking but didn't cross any other lines. Instead, I retreated to the back of the room, savoring a cigar. Not my proudest habit, but it was something my father had taught me to appreciate, like the occasional whiskey on the rocks. For a brief moment, I forgot my troubles. Sometime after Pour Some Sugar on Me played for the 6th time, the party began to wind down. People returned to their rooms, some accompanied by dancers. By 3 a.m., the music had faded, and I was ready to call it a night. Only 4 of us remained: Aaron, Jason, a guy named Neil, and me. We lounged on a couch, swapping stories about our wives, or, in Aaron's case, his fiancée. For all the chaos of the night, it was apparent he deeply loved her. I respected that. Then, a stranger appeared. He was at least 6 feet 7 inches, lean like a scarecrow, and dressed in all black except for a white shirt. His slicked-back white hair and piercing blue eyes gave him an almost otherworldly aura. "Looks like you gentlemen are having a good time," he said with a sly smile. "I'm guessing the ladies didn't disappoint." "They sure didn't," Jason slurred. "But we're married men here," Oh, I can tell. If not for the cigars, this room would reek of virtue. That earned a laugh. Jason introduced him as Tim, or Stranger Tim. Apparently, he was the go-to guy if you wanted a good time between Pasadena and Kent Island. He claimed to run several clubs and dabbled in filmmaking. His business cards hinted at the type of movies he produced, sophisticated but with an edge. As the night wore on, our conversation grew deeper. Aaron shared his hopes for a lasting marriage. Jason fretted over his youngest child making it through college. Neil got emotional about his aging dog. I stayed quiet, unwilling to confront real life at that moment. Stranger Tim leaned forward, his foot accidentally tipping over an ashtray. He pulled out a silver lighter etched with a crow and 2 sunflowers, flicking it open to reveal a steady, vibrant blue flame. Imagine, he said, you could get answers to your biggest questions. What your marriage looks like 20 years from now, how to help your kid finish college, or how to give your dog a little more time. Aaron chuckled, finishing his drink. That'd be something, wouldn't it? It sure would, Jason agreed. Well, what if I told you it's possible? Tim asked, holding the flame steady. It'll cost you, but you'd get your answers. The price depends on the scope of your question. Is this some party trick? Like a Luigi board? Jason laughed. The rest of us cracked up, and even I couldn't hold back a snort. Ouija board, Neil corrected. Luigi's the Mario guy. Whatever. Tim, is that what this is? Nah, Stranger Tim grinned. I assure you, this is nothing like that. He turned his attention to me, his eyes scanning me up and down. That strange, unwavering smile stayed on his face, and he never seemed to blink. Even through my drunken haze, I could tell something about him was deeply unsettling. I'm good, I replied with a polite smile. You guys go ahead. Surely there's something you'd want to know. Something worthwhile, he pressed. His persistence was irritating. I glanced at my empty glass, growing increasingly annoyed. Exploiting the fears of drunk people felt like one of the cheapest tricks to make a quick buck. It reminded me of a televangelist, though without the hollow promise of paradise. All right, I nodded, deciding to humor him. Let's see what you've got. Tell me the color of my lucky boxers, the ones I wore at my wedding. That's all I want to know. That's it? Fair enough, Tim replied. Now, take a good hard look and tell me one thing. Our attention shifted to the silver lighter in his hand, its steady blue flame glowing like something out of a surreal painting. Do you submit? He asked. We did. It all happened in a flash. A loud, sharp crack, like the simultaneous snapping of countless dry twigs. Jason's right arm fractured in 3 places, with jagged bones piercing through his skin at grotesque angles. Neil's jaw shattered, and 3 teeth spilled from his mouth, clinking softly against the floor as they rolled away. Aaron's left leg seemed to implode, splitting open from ankle to hip. And me? A sharp sting on my index finger, nothing more. For a moment, there were no screams, just silent shock. The room was suspended in eerie stillness as we all stared into the blue light. There was no panic or pain, only a strange sense of clarity. Yes, Jason said, his voice suddenly calm and precise. Yes, Aaron murmured. That's how she's still so beautiful. Neil tried to speak, but his mangled jaw turned his words into unintelligible slurs. Bloodied spit dribbled from the corner of his mouth, followed by 2 more teeth. I sat frozen, staring at the wreckage of these broken men. As Stranger Tim lit a cigarette with that same lighter, they looked like puppets whose strings had been abruptly severed, their movements mechanical and their voices devoid of emotion. Tim held the lighter high, the blue flame steady and unyielding, and locked eyes with me, his smile stretching wider. They were red, he said, with little white petals, With that, he snapped the lighter shut, extinguishing the flame and, with it, our collective consciousness. When I woke, I screamed. The air reeked of blood, and dark brown stains covered the floor and furniture. 2 EMTs were performing chest compressions on Aaron, while someone carefully lifted Jason out of his chair. Neil was nowhere to be seen. Bright sunlight streamed into the room, blinding and disorienting. Someone shouted at me to move. "Make room," they barked. "Get out of the way." "Is he dead? Oh my God. Is he dead?" A hotel staff member helped me to my feet and guided me out of the room. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, the hangover and shock overwhelmed me, and I vomited onto the carpet. The corridors were filled with confused guests while a flurry of activity swirled around me. I caught a brief glimpse of Aaron's arm as they wheeled him away. It was pale as snow. Meanwhile, all I had was a faint bruise on my index finger. The chaos was deafening. EMTs rushed back and forth, and voices screamed through the halls and rooms. One voice kept echoing, "What's wrong with Aaron?" over and over. My heart raced so fast it felt like it might burst. Tim had been right. My lucky boxers were red with white petals. They were the ones I wore on my wedding day, and they never failed to make Sammy smile. A bright, silly reminder of happier days. Of course, they were lucky, but I couldn't stop staring at my finger. I had asked a trivial question and paid an equally small price. Was it really that simple? Could it have been confirmed? Truly real? Aaron's fiancée promised to update us about his condition as soon as she knew anything. A fellow guest offered me a ride home, and we silently left town one by one. The entire journey, my thoughts were consumed by the tall man with the silver lighter. When I arrived home, Sammy had already heard the news. She struggled to the front door, nearly dropping her cane as she threw herself into my arms. I held her tightly, the dull ache in my finger a constant reminder of the night's events. "Thank God you're okay," she sobbed. "They said it was an accident." I didn't want to burden her with the truth, not when she already had so much to bear. "I don't know, honey," I lied, pressing a kiss to her hair. I was ultimately out cold. Over the next few weeks, updates trickled in. Aaron began recovering. Jason's injuries were severe enough that part of his lower arm, along with 2 fingers, had to be amputated. Neil had to rely on drinking his meals for the foreseeable future, though he was reportedly improving. I tried to push the memories aside, but the haunting image of that blue flame kept invading my nightmares. Sometimes, I'd imagine Stranger Tim sitting at the edge of my bed, asking if there was something I wanted to know. And, of course, there was. But the idea was wild. Prophets and soothsayers didn't wander around modern society. Still, when I stumbled across an Instagram post of Neil hugging his dog, an ache tugged at my chest. Maybe it had all been confirmed. Perhaps I'd walked away from a genuine opportunity. In early December, Sammy's condition worsened. Her parents started visiting daily, helping with her appointments while I tried to juggle work and everything else. The doctors had little hope left but continued her treatment out of obligation. Then, one morning, I found myself down to my last pair of clean underwear. My lucky boxers, red with white petals. Slipping them on brought a rare smile to Sammy's face, even amidst her struggles. That small moment of joy fueled a decision in me. I wasn't going to let life grind me down. I wouldn't sit back and wait for the worst to happen. Taking time off work, I reached out to Jason. He was still on medical leave, so we met at a downtown cafe over bear claws and coffee. Without his usual party getup, Jason almost looked normal. We chatted about Aaron and Neil's progress. Jason shared updates on his recovery and reflected on the wild night we'd lived through. Then he gave me a long, searching look. You really have red boxers with white petals, don't you?" he asked. "I do," I admitted. He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee and staring out the window. "My boy's doing better," he said. "Turns out he had an eye condition causing his migraines. Now it's like night and day." Jason smiled faintly. "It's nothing short of a miracle." We sat in silence, sipping our coffee, until I finally gathered the courage to speak. "Jason, I need the number." He tried to help, but it wasn't straightforward. He'd met Tim through a convoluted chain of acquaintances. Backtracking that connection was tricky. Jason gave me the number of someone at the casino we'd visited, which led me to a nightclub manager in Hallithorpe. 2 days of relentless messaging, emails, and calls later, I finally got a solid lead. A dancer in Ferndale offered to set up a meeting with Tim for a price. Cost me every dollar of my blackjack winnings, but eventually, I got the time and location. A man who'd recently won the lottery had rented out a strip club, and Stranger Tim was the host. On Friday night, I drove to the club, which was closed to the public for the event. Slipping the bouncer $100 and mentioning the dancer's name earned me entry. The party was in full swing, booming music, dim red lighting, smoke, champagne, and the smell of sweat. Bottles clinked against glasses amid cheers and groans, the atmosphere oddly reminiscent of that bachelor party. As I inhaled the smoky air, I spotted him, Stranger Tim, sitting at the bar. My heart sank as I approached him. This could either be my saving grace or the dumbest decision of my life. Tim turned slightly, sliding a whiskey shot toward me without even glancing up. "I knew you'd come back," he said, casting me a sidelong glance. "You've got questions?" "Just one. It'll have to wait," he replied with a grin, raising his glass toward the crowd. Cheers erupted from the partygoers. Tim muttered under his breath, his smile unwavering. "Clown monkeys." Then his sharp, piercing eyes locked onto mine. They felt different now, more intense, almost seething. I could have sworn they flickered like fire. "I don't usually let people come back for seconds," he said. "Then again, most don't try." "It's important," I insisted. "I'll pay the price." "Oh, I'm sure you will," he said. "People don't chase me down unless they're desperate." "Drink your whiskey." "I'm fine." I wasn't asking. A chill ran down my spine, and I downed the whiskey in one go. The burn seared down my throat, and my hands tingled as the faint ache in my index finger resurfaced. A subtle warning of what might come. Tim turned back to the bartender, ordering another drink for himself. "Who are you?" I asked. "How do you do what you do?" "I'm no one," Tim said casually. "And who cares? So you won't tell me?" He raised his glass, letting the liquid catch and reflect the bursts of colored light. Without warning, his silver lighter appeared on the table. I hadn't seen him reach for it, it simply materialized there. "I come from a land beneath a watchful red sun," Stranger Tim grinned. "A place where the snow falls like feathers, the shores shimmer in silver black, and the flowers choke to death, fading into a sickly blue." He tapped the lighter gently. "Light my fire." As Tim floated from table to table, refilling glasses and sparking cigarettes, I stayed at the bar. Over time, the scene blurred together, bodies moving, dancing, sitting. It all melded into a haze of flesh, sweat, and fabric. Wedding rings caught bursts of strobe lights while memorial tattoos shifted against exposed skin. My phone buzzed. I knew it was Sammy, but I couldn't bring myself to look at the screen. Sometime after midnight, I dozed off at the bar and woke as one of the dancers wished the bartender a good night. Blinking awake, I noticed him waving me over. The crowd mainly had thinned, leaving just a handful of people behind. Tim sat at the head of a table, commanding attention. Faint traces of powder dusted the surface near puddles of spilled mojitos. "You think there was ever life on Mars?" Someone slurred. "That's like, up there." right? Yeah, like way over there. But like, what does it mean for us? Tim gave me a pointed look before turning his attention back to the group. You gentlemen seem like a curious bunch, he said, smiling. How about a little hypothetical? He launched into the same pitch he'd given us before, spinning it into a twisted game. He promised answers to their deepest, most personal questions for a price. His delivery made it sound playful, almost like a drinking challenge. A deal with the devil in a strip club. The questions started innocently enough. One guy wanted to know who had stolen his pickup truck. Another, playing the clown, asked for the part number of a replacement drip pan for his refrigerator. They all laughed as they took turns asking absurd, trivial questions. Meanwhile, I sat silently, sweat trickling down my back. Then, one man, emboldened by drink, leaned forward. I want to know what God looks like, he declared with a wide grin. Wouldn't you all like to know? That's quite the question, Tim replied, his grin widening. One of the biggest, actually. Yeah, well, I want to know, the man repeated, looking around. Don't you guys want to know? The murmurs of agreement grew. They did want to know. I tried to intervene, tossing out suggestions to steer them back to their earlier, safer questions, or better yet, to call it a night. But I was too late. Tim had already produced his lighter, the steady blue flame illuminating his face. His eyes burned brighter now, fiercer, as though he thrived on their curiosity. A knot of dread tightened in my chest. I wanted to do something, anything, to stop this. I considered heading for the bathroom to pull the fire alarm or buying another round of drinks to stall for time. But as I glanced at Tim, his gaze bore into mine, his grin a silent challenge. It was already too late. Don't you have a question to ask? Too, he asked, his tone both inviting and menacing. Swallowing my pride and the lump in my throat, I nodded. My voice was barely a whisper. I want to know how to save my wife. The table fell silent. A few curious glances darted in my direction, but Tim's expression didn't change. That's a big ask, he said with a slow, deliberate grin. A real big ask. Can you help? I pressed. Oh, I can, he replied, his eyes glinting. And I'm sure Sammy will be just fine. A chill crawled up my spine, but in my nervous state, I failed to notice one glaring detail. I had never told him her name. He flicked the lighter open, the blue flame springing to life. The room seemed to darken as the flame grew brighter. The music faded, replaced by a buzzing static from the overhead speakers. Now look deep into the flame, gentlemen, Tim said, his voice low and commanding. Look deep and answer me. His eyes flickered, but the flame remained steady. Do you submit? He asked, and they did. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding my breath, bracing for the inevitable pain. Seconds passed, and then a whisper. I love this part, came the voice. The man across from me began to unravel. There's no better word for it. His fingertips seemed to peel away, his very bones disassembling themselves. They slipped free of his flesh, transforming into needle-like shards that pierced him from within. His skull fractured, and his muscles contorted into something resembling a grotesque parody of a human smile. He began barking words, nonsensical syllables from a language long lost to time. Despite the madness, his pronunciation was eerily perfect. As his bones burst apart like a box of fireworks, his expression betrayed no agony. Whatever he saw in that moment drove him into a madness beyond comprehension. And yet, as he glimpsed the face of a god, he smiled. Io, 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 he chanted. Blood and tears streamed from his eyes. With a loud snap, his neck broke, followed by his spine and hips, twisting his body into an unnatural, impossible shape. Panic erupted among the others. One man tumbled backward, his body splitting open as he hit the floor. Another made a desperate dash for the emergency exit, but didn't make it halfway before his legs exploded like kernels of popcorn. Someone screamed, their voice faltering as their body collapsed inward like crumpled paper. Another man's ribcage split wide open, folding him inside out like an empty pocket. Their cries weren't of pain. They were cries of ecstasy. Stranger Tim observed it all, a smirk playing across his lips as he absorbed the scene. Without even glancing at me, his voice cut through the chaos. "Yours will be worse," he said calmly. "They wanted to see something. You want to save something. Do you have any idea what that's worth?" He loomed over me, his eyes blazing with a blue flame that seemed to dance within his skull. "To preserve the infinite potential of a life," he continued, "a life created in the image of those who began it all." Then he laughed, a deep, guttural laugh that echoed like it was the greatest joke he'd ever heard. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he cackled. "You are going to suffer so many times over," he said, almost gleefully. Raising his lighter, he placed a finger on its lid. "Thank you," he said, his smile unwavering. At that moment, images bombarded my mind. A beach of shimmering black sand, white feathers cascading from a clear sky, and a vast and motionless ocean stretching into infinity. Above it all, a blood-red, lidless eye hovered, ever watchful. It peered into the cracks of existence, bending reality as it expanded in my mind, pulling me into an endless void. Io, 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 the chant echoed in the recesses of my being. And then, clarity hit me like a tidal wave. I realized I'd had the cure all along. A few weeks from now, Sammy was destined to make a miraculous recovery. After countless setbacks, she'd finally take a step forward. It was inevitable. Her hair would grow back, her radiant smile would return, and by spring, she'd be sitting beside me at the pond, feeding ducks in the warm sunlight. And now I was going to die for nothing. I snapped back to consciousness, dangling in the air, held up by Stranger Tim. He was panting like a ravenous beast, his eyes consumed by darkness, blue embers flickering deep within his hollow sockets. His teeth had transformed into sharp, predatory points, and his tongue wriggled like a pale maggot. He chuckled softly, his laughter laced with anticipation, his gaze piercing into my very core. "No," I stammered. "No, it's not." The final echoes of Io faded, reduced to a single wheezing cough from the last man whose face still resembled something human. Stranger Tim's smile disappeared, replaced by a deep frown. "You're not saving her, are you?" he muttered, tilting his head in annoyance. "No, she's going to make it on her own. God damn it." He grabbed me by the neck with one hand and hurled me to the floor. I struggled against him, but it was like trying to move a tree trunk. "I was looking forward to that," he growled, his voice low and guttural. "I was aching for it," he sneered, his frustration palpable. "And I get nothing? Just let me—" Abruptly, he stopped, cutting himself off. "No," he spat. "I'm not walking away empty-handed. I'm going to savor this." Releasing me, he stepped back, his presence suffocating. My mind raced with a torrent of thoughts. Pleas, curses, sobs, screams, all collapsing into an indistinguishable whine, a noise that was both nothing and everything. Tim bore down on me, rage blazing in his eyes. "Give me what you—" A sharp crack, then darkness. Later, I heard the place went up in flames. People speculated that Tim started the fire, likely to erase any trace of what had happened. The blame quickly fell on the partygoers, none of whom had paid much attention to fire safety. I vaguely remember swirling smoke above me as someone dragged me by my legs. In that infinite second between life and death, I saw it. The enormous red eye hovering above, impossibly distant yet all-encompassing, its gaze piercing through everything. Io, 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 the chant echoed in the back of my mind. For those who ask, my official story is simple. I went to a party I'd been invited to. There was a fire, and a falling beam caused a minor spinal fracture that knocked me unconscious. Only a few know the truth, that the injury happened long before the fire. The strangest irony happened just a few months ago. I was lying in bed, waiting for my pain medication to take effect, when Sammy stood in the doorway, smiling. "You can't sleep all day," she said gently. "We've got ducks to feed." I wanted to share this story in the faint hope that it might save someone from tragedy. He's still out there, lurking on the edges of parties, eavesdropping on drunken conversations, waiting for that perfect moment of weakness. Sometimes the most straightforward advice is the most profound. Never ever talk to strangers. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more incredible stories in the weeks ahead. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Have a good night.